You'll be happy to know I didn't over prepare for this workshop. We're trying to build on what came up and emerged from yesterday's conversations. So we had a little bit of a meeting last night and talked about a couple of things that we could use this time for. I sat at the project at the table that was talking about capstones and real world projects, and that's going to be the focus for our time now. Is how do we do real world projects? I heard a lot of pain points for people around real world projects that came out yesterday, and I also heard a lot of really great solutions and ways that people are working through those pain points and with their different situations. Couple of things that really were strong pain points that we heard about yesterday is especially around selecting projects, finding good partners, matching up matching up what your project partners need versus what the student goals are, and how to link those two. I think was a really big pain point. So those are some of the things I was thinking that we might dig into with this time. I also heard a couple of times people say, what do we mean by good? Which I think is a great question to ask. So I think I want to spend a little bit of time with that for sure. There's a couple of things that I heard where there's really a range of ideas or range of opinions that maybe some controversies, a couple that we might want to dig into. How are we training people to be in service? Are we training people to be stewards? Are we giving them the agency to pick projects that they want as students? There's some discussion that we had that was interesting around that at one of the tables I was at yesterday. But I'd like to hear before we get started, is there anything additionally or any other kind of burning issues or needs that might be good for us to work on together? Or does this sound like a good going in plan? Okay, I've got one thumb up. There's one thumb. Other people are thinking about it. Okay, two thumbs, several thumbs. Okay, all right. So I'm going to suggest to get started. So we did a sort of a last minute run looking all over campus for some materials, some craft paper up here, markers, different things, because the envision is that you're working at your tables and you're doing some discussion and documentation, that we're focusing ourselves for, on a certain problem, certain question for a little bit of time, and then reflecting out and also having a little documentation from each table. But it might be more convenient for us to try to do it in Google Docs. So I put into the shared drive. So I don't know do people have access to that shared drive? Okay, I would love to tell you about the shared drive. So did we send out a link to it? Okay, so let me make sure I'm doing screen share, which I may or may not be doing right now. Okay. Okay, yeah, so we can do that. So, and we can clean it up afterwards too. So in this D4G4ED, oh, good. I'm glad it's not just me, because I thought I was spelling it wrong, but you changed the name, the acronym's different here too. Okay, it's not just me. So in here, I also put in, so the things I talked about, the slides I used yesterday are in this speaker files. The data for good growth map, which is what I drew on for some of the things I talked about yesterday. It's a longer document that covers things like scoping projects, as well as some resources that are relevant to the UW Data Science for Social Good program. Those are all in there, in that file, in that folder. So I'm going to open up this document, workshop day 1, workshop day 2, workshop 1, day 2. I don't know if that's confusing. And then here I'm just going to put in the minimally just reminding people what we talked about yesterday to get started was mapping mapping your data for good journey. There's all of these considerations. So I'm suggesting that we start out with the first 2. So the kind of good you're aiming to do, the theory of change, a little bit, but getting into that very simply by what do we mean by good. So what I'm going to suggest is that maybe one person per table has access to this drive, and we'll give it, I'm going to say, let's do a soft launch of like 5 minutes of discussion about good and see where we go. Just maybe the bubble up points, and see how far we dig in and whether we like this way of facilitation. We do have the craft paper and markers and Post-its if we decide we want to go analog. I think that this is important because once we get into working with other people, they're certainly going to have different ideas about what good is, and our students do too. So it becomes more of an issue, I think, in real world projects for us to be able to articulate the good that we're trying to do and understand where other people are coming from. So let's get started with that. And I'm going to suggest that you just simply in the speaker notes section here, just bullet point for your table, things that are bubbling up, and let's see where we land with this as a first question to get us started today. So I'm going to put my timer on for 7 minutes, and we'll see where we're at. Okay, so that's been 7 minutes. So I don't know if people have been able to get into make any notes. It looks like team two. I don't know how I don't know how we numbered ourselves, but some folks have gotten into the doc and some haven't. So let's just have a report out from each table a little bit. So what do we mean by good? What is coming up? So what is this question? What does this question mean, and how does it work for us? Yeah. You need more minutes? Okay. Oh, good. Anybody else want more time? We want more time for this question? Okay, awesome. I'm so happy I'm in the right room. I'm with the people that cannot, we need to dig into this. That's great. Okay, so we're going to give this more time. Okay, so some folks already wrapped up their discussion, so I'm making a new question here. Sorry, what? No worries. All right. Okay, so we've had about 15 minutes on this question. So I think we should, I know that we want to also talk about pain points around projects and dig into, there's some really, I heard some really good stuff yesterday about how to support projects better. So I want to make sure we get time for that. How about over here at this? Sorry. I love that it's hard for me to get your attention. I'm loving that actually. Let's start with this table over here. Hi. Table 6, are they numbered? I missed the number. Of course they're numbered. Whoa, okay, I missed where's the numbering? How do I know what the number is? They know. Table 6. Table 6. Start us off. Why don't do you want to come up here? We have the roving mic. The roving mic. Roving mic to table 6, please. So tell us about what came up in your conversation. But we've got a mic coming your way. Oh, here it is. Oh, I'm sorry. I could have gotten it myself had I known.
So we spent a fair bit of time talking about first identifying good as either individual good or social good. And then we started focusing more on the social good side, but identified that some individual good potentially could be social good as well. And so the focus of our group was then on social good, still acknowledging that that may include some individual good. But there was still some debate on aspects of that. And then we started talking about specifically what is meant by social good. And we came to the conclusion about having positive impact and positive action. So extending or improving life was mentioned, but we were kind of still working on some of the details.
Awesome, thank you. And then the second, table, are you table 5 then, Carl?
Well, yeah, okay. Again, part of what we started with, again, is thinking about, are there existing frameworks that we're trying to latch onto for a definition of good, the challenge of doing that in interdisciplinary settings. Even if you start drawing on kind of philosophy or virtue ethics or things like that, you're not even going to come up with one framework. And just as an interesting thread, 3 of us on the table are at religiously affiliated institutions. So even if your institutional identity maybe gives you a value framework, that's not necessarily even kind of a settled thing in terms of good human flourishing, things like that. So Richard mentions Maslow's hierarchy, kind of, are we moving up, moving across, thinking about positionality and situatedness? I can't remember who raised it, but I think a really interesting question of like, is everything in the field or domain connected or accountable for doing good, or is this work siloed in particular areas? And then I think this is kind of more me as an individual speaking, I think a productive thing that I started to hear emerging was, can we come up with kind of characteristics or attributes? So things like equity, things like sustainability, things like kind of who's defining the problem, but I think we raised some important questions of, to the point that table 6 raised, kind of individual versus social good, but also thinking about solutions in broader contexts, especially in an educational context. We might have a clearly defined problem with a partner in a project that's scoped, but thinking about downstream implications, policy, economic, et cetera, that come from a particular solution or product that's developed. How much are we trying to equip students to think about all of those things versus bounding? So lots of questions, no answers, some provocations.
Awesome. That's just what we need to get started.
But everyone should get a voice. Can I have? Did you have? Oh, here. Oh, yeah, okay, sorry. Thank you, sorry. So we basically started with what good actually applies to from different perspective. It can be from an individual or from the faculty who is teaching, or different dimension of people. So we kind of came to a conclusion that it basically has to deal with three major pillars. First category would fall into people, planet, and prosperity. So when we are talking about good, it has to include the benefit for the people. It could include student learning, or the student-faculty relation, or the solution that the student is proposing is actually good for the people, for, let's say, poverty, for example. And it could also include planet, for whether it's like for environmental aspects, the solution they are providing is good for the benefit of environment. And let's just be honest, when you are proposing any solutions, there has to bring some economic benefits for everyone who is involved in the project, because at the end of it, it had to be financed by somebody one. So at the same time, we would also be focusing on whether the solution or the project that you're actually building brings the prosperity to the people involved, directly or indirectly. That's what we can.
Wow, so I love that. So the weaving of the individual benefit as well as the social benefit, that
Yeah.
sort of good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end, good for me, good for you, good for
Yes.
equity and how we're all resourced. I love that.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. So adding on, we've got another table here.
Hi, we discussed the good for the let me read that from actually that way it's easier. In this strong question, I'm so sorry. Number 3, first of all, we can say do no harm is considered as good, but we should have a positive impact. That positive impact leads to do no harm. Then it leads to understand how it's going to benefit the majority of the people, majority of the society. When it comes to that, how are we going to find out the benefit that gets to the society? We need to have a clearly identified and defined and measurable goals. So that's what we discussed. So do no harm, good for the society. If it is good for the society, how do we measure them? They should be clearly identified, because it is otherwise it's like on the fence, like, where you can say things, it's doing good, yeah, but how you define the good, how you measure the good, that's what we discussed.
Mhm.
It should have a metric that identifying the metric is vital, and it is not easy. It depends on the context of the problem that you're trying to solve. I guess do you all agree? That's what we discussed. Thank you. All right, so I'll pass the mic.
And this is I want to say you're really representing well, I think, the engineering perspective on good and the computer science perspective on good, right? Something that's measurable, something that's very important to us in our field. And we really anchor around that. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Which group?
Whichever group is eager to go.
Oh, table 1, go ahead.
So we basically discussed and made it very simple. Good means make student learn. The first thing is because student may come from many different disciplines, data may come from many different domains.
I'm sorry, there was a little crosstalk. Could you just repeat what you said one more time? I'm sorry.
So we basically talked about that good means first we should make students learn, and the data may come from many different domains. The student may come from many different disciplines.
Okay, so student learning, obviously, yeah, that somebody, I think somebody said that yesterday, education, somebody in the education space, right? It's it's de facto good because it's education, right? And that's our primary good that we have to be anchored to as educators. That's a great reminder. Thank you for that.
So we said a lot of the things that have already been said, so I'll focus on just a couple of different things. We did start with a conversation of what kind of good are we talking about? Are we talking about what is a good project? Or are we talking about what is a data for good project? And we had a little bit of each of those. So for the data for good, it was things like good for society at large, deals with the human condition. We did say that it's typically not a binary option. It's not good or bad. It's more of a scale, because typically something that's good for one group might not benefit another group. So that had to be taken into consideration. We did, and I think this is new. We talked about how educating people how their data is used, or data are used, and teaching about data and data literacy has positive benefits. It has good benefits. It creates empowerment, allowing people to make good decisions there when they're fully aware of the implications of it and understand it. So I think that's the new stuff for us.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So I heard so many things that that are fascinating for me in the way that we nuance this, right? There's actually a big diversity here in the room of ideas about what good is, right? And I think some of the things that I think about is again, that co-evolution of the problem solution, right? So we've got to pick a project. It's always got to be a good project, right? Whether it's for good or something else, we need a good project. We need to be anchoring around learning, because that's the space that we hold as educators. And then there's these other more intangible goods, some of which we can measure, which is something that we really like. So that's our play space, is like data and facts and measurable things and outcomes, right? But project partners may be very more emphasis around relationships. They might be more process oriented. So, I was just, I came from another a conference where there was a lot of tribes in Washington State participating, and tribes are very oriented towards process. So if you want to do good with a tribal entity, you're going to be going along with a specific kind of process, right? So there's a lot of mechanics that have to come together. And so, and then there's this, how much of this do we expose the students to, and where do we expose the students, and when do we bring them bring in these issues of good? Or, as we found at DSSG, the reason my role exists at DSSG at UW is because what was discovered was that sort of the better and more successful projects were the ones where the project leads were exposing the students to more of the problem space and the theory of change, usually in an experiential way, by doing what they called at the time field trips, to go and visit stakeholders and exposing them to the larger problem space and the larger objectives of the projects, and giving them more context, actually led to better projects and more student satisfaction. So that's the reason that my role exists, is that sort of some of us are, at least in the project space, when we get in the project space, what happens is students are also assessing. They're asking the same questions and trying to make the same reasoning that we are. And especially when we come in and tell them, we put good on there, data science for social good. People, it becomes a pressure cooker now. I want to do good science, and I want to do good in the world. And I'm coming in and I'm sizing myself up, and I'm sizing you up, and I'm sizing the project up, and I'm trying to decide if does this reconcile with my own lived experience? Does it reconcile with my value system and what I know of the world? And so I think it's really important to think about, when we start getting into the real world projects, how do we make space for this, to come to some sort of collective understanding among the teams, among whoever is involved in the project. And how do we help students to move through that? It may be easier or harder depending on what the project is, right? Especially our students at UW, we find they're very oriented towards equity and social justice, right? If you say good, they're thinking about questions of equity, right? That's the generation we have coming up now. So something like the good of, wow, you're working on a climate change project. Okay, that's great. Who's going to be most impacted? How do we make this more impactful for, low income people, or, the students come in with these kind of questions. So I popped in another question into the deck to transition to that. So how do we prepare students to tackle good? And I can share some resources, but I'd love to, let's spend another, and this is a journey. So I think Rick set us up, right, with this kind of graduated process, right, of how we think about this and different kinds of exercises, whatever we're teaching. There's different ways that we can think about preparation from the moment that we encounter students, right through maybe up into what we actually do when we're engaging around a project. But let's give this let's give this I'm going to say 12 minutes because last time you guys wanted to dig in and get more. And let's try to use the documentation on slide 5. So let's use it to just popcorn ideas out there and get some ideas out there, because that might be useful to other people in the room. Okay, we've got about a minute. Okay. All right. So how are we preparing students to do good in our computer science and STEM classes? Preparing them for real world do good projects. We're going to go the opposite way this time since we've got the mics over on the other side of the room.
It's fine. Okay. So I think we've sort of talked about maybe three things. So one is how do you inspire students to start thinking about maybe deeper projects? So John brought up the idea of using an article that maybe listed the top 10 issues for college age students in the last election as sort of a starting point for students to say, you know, instead of sort of just an open-ended, what do you want to study that leads to a bunch of sports projects, sort of getting students, giving them some inspiration to maybe say, are there any of these topics that are a little bit of more interest, so they can sort of dig a little deeper. Talked about bringing in knowledge-based experts so that the students are getting more exposure to sort of a deeper knowledge of that space as a way to do that. And then we also talked about how, you know, maybe part of the project needs to be students explaining why this is good or why this is of value to people, you know, even if it's a project for a nonprofit, why is it of value to that, maybe not just that nonprofit, but why should people outside of that nonprofit care about this project too? And sort of making that part of, you know, their final poster or their final presentation or something, so that they're really having to articulate that.
Yeah, sorry. All right, so our table talked a lot about like having students identify the problem, what actual good could they do? And then once they figure out what the problem is and, you know, what resources they have, do they have the proper knowledge, supplies, time, etc. And then we also started talking about taking into account the actual student level. Because like if I'm teaching an undergrad freshman, they might not be aware that a problem even exists. So, you know, giving them something on mental health and having them realize, oh, we're in a mental health crisis is actually doing good for them because now they know there's a problem and they can start thinking about how to fix that problem. Whereas graduate students kind of have already identified the world sucks, there are problems. How do I fix them? And so just taking all of that account by, you know, reaching out to stakeholders or whatever is entailed with their projects.
To add that part as well. Additionally, we discussed, I shared a one case study, what happened with the RPI we did. So we looked at it, the data sets obtained from the NASA satellites to have renewable energy. So we looked at the solar radiance data from NASA satellites, then land surface temperature mapping and wind data from satellites throughout the United States. It was a big data problem. But then we identified, we taught the students how to use the machine learning techniques and various AI techniques. Then we identified these are the ideal locations to have solar farms, like a large scale solar farms. Then when we looked at it, the results pointed out these are the good locations, but they are on tribal lands. So we need to tell, now that's a question. It's yes, global warming is happening. We need to, for the greater good, we need to have solar farms right there. But are we going to have it on a tribal land? So understanding how do we prepare students to tackle good means we need to tell the students how to identify those blind spots. The blind spot is they consider, okay, this is good for the greater community, for the entire world, if we put this solar farm, but then they have a slight kind of a blind spot, not considering what's, you know, the societal and things. So just teaching them all that also, it's considered as a how to tackle the students. So yeah. I had to explain the context, otherwise it was difficult to tell the story, what we did with. Yeah.
question for you.
Yes.
Are we not being contradictory with our original definition of what good is? If good is the majority benefits, frankly, taking the land would be, we're an oxymoron at this table.
So.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what I said. There are blind spots.
Yeah.
Do no harm. Yeah. So, hold on. Let me defend that. What I said. That it says how to tackle. So they need to teach to create the negotiation technique as well, right? So yes, we can come to an agreement to have that. So tackling the question it says, how do we prepare students to tackle good?
Well, I think knowing our own ethical stance is one way to do it for sure. And one measure that these are the questions that are all arbitrary, but once you get a real project, they become very meaty for all of us. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So as you can see there, we wrote that how do we prepare students to tackle good is prepare them with necessary skills to understand what good means, technical know-how to analyze, and also collaborate with each other. By the way, we put this question on ChatGPT and
Thank you.
and it gave actually 10 points.
Okay.
And then I said, what are the top 3? Even we wrote that earlier, those were top 3.
Awesome. Can you, for the record, will you put the chat GPT into our notes so that we can see that too? Since chat GPT is now participant in our workshop. Thank you. That's awesome.
I guess I'm going. Okay, where's my notes? All right, we took this from a teacher's perspective, which I thought, Dharma, that's where you were leading us as educators. How do we prepare for our classrooms? So we talked about Bloom's taxonomy, and depending on where the task that we're assigning to the students, is it a small task or is it like an entire semester sort of task? We can be preparing them about the good just to understand it, or we can be preparing them at a higher taxonomy to be creative in the task, in the context of it. On the metacognition and reflective end of our classrooms, we want the students to know how they are learning and why they are learning, and that they're provided lots of opportunities to learn about the local context of the content or the audience, and then the larger, like, global context of the subject matter. We also thought that the experience should be iterative, and so whether you're using design thinking or systems thinking, that the students are provided regular and frequent opportunities for reflection and retrospective, and then are adjusting to what they're learning as they go. And then, did you want to talk about the leadership development piece?
Hi. So one of the pieces that we were talking about is that if you want in like a capstone experience or in some sort of like end of education event for students to kind of demonstrate severe leadership principles, you need to kind of infuse that throughout the curriculum, maybe even from like the first introductory course all the way through, whether it starts out small or kind of like, if it starts small and progressively grows, that is best, but it needs to be kind of infused throughout so that they can reflect and retrospect on the leadership aspect as well as kind of all of the skills that they're developing.
Thank you.
Unless someone wrestles me for the microphone. I think kind of building on what Becca was saying, we really thought about this question at the curriculum and program level. So, thinking about the conversation that some of us were having yesterday about capstone projects, who do you need on these teams? Is it just data science students? Is it just computer science students? Or what does it look like to bring interdisciplinary skill sets together from design or from humanities and social science disciplines? And so I think, like, what does that look like from a team composition standpoint, but also from like a program and faculty perspective too. So that was one big thread of like, okay, if we want them to be able to do XYZ things as part of their work on projects, who do you need to have in the room? I think the other thread that emerged for us was how do you thread some of these questions and considerations throughout a curriculum? So we were thinking about like general education courses. Again, we have kind of a concentration of folks at faith affiliated institutions. So like at Notre Dame, one of our general education philosophy courses is God and the Good Life. How do you take those questions about meaning and value and purpose and thread them through curriculum that can be highly technical? What does that look like? How do you measure and assess it? What do the accountability structures look like? How does that relate to questions of like instructor autonomy and academic freedom? So how do you not just say, you take a philosophy course, you have a capstone project, and then magically something happens in the middle. So trying to tease out what that can look like. And I'll just shamelessly say, I teach a critical cultural course on sport and big data. So if you get a glut of sport projects and you want them to be more thoughtful, I would be thrilled to talk to folks about how you can push students to think about sport more critically. Just side plug.
So I'm going to editorialize for a second here and say, I'm really glad you brought up that interdisciplinary part. I think that's one of the reasons that's one of the strengths of the summer programs, right? Our teams are radically interdisciplinary, and that's hard to do in a lot of programs. But that is how we do it. And that's how other data science for social good programs like University of North Florida always partners the data science students with humanities, social science, psychology students, something that's more on the people side.
So we talked about a couple of different things here. So help students identify what good means to them. How does good fit into their value systems? Wellness, so socio-emotional and preparing students for challenging situations. Having data that's accessible and relevant. Talking to students to identify problems. And then keeping a list of those problems for future reference in helping to identify good problems to work on, and should ask the students about problems early in the semester and then towards the end of the semester, just so that you can get a good sense of you could get better. You could also get feedback on different problems after they've had more experience working in the domain. This also ensures that problems are meaningful for them as well. Help students to learn clearly to understand the problems that they're working on. A lot of times that's kind of half the battle. Talk to students about current social issues. And then just for fun, I put this into Google Bard to see its response, and I posted that on the notes as well.
All right, these are really great things that are coming up. So I took some liberty here and popped in some slides to just give examples of some of the things that I've been experimenting with. This is so the first couple are just examples of 200 levels, because I think for me, my mental model is coming from the perspective that we want people to be able to apply ethics on the spot and think about good within the context of their technical work. Right, that's when the magic happens. It's really great if we know who John Law is, or some of the other people that help us to think about what good means in philosophy and stuff. But at the end of the day, it's really, do we have, if we're sitting in a team at a company or some other place, decision makers, are we comfortable talking about ethics on the spot in relation to our work, right? And so how can we start that? So in this 200 level introductory class that I was on the teaching team for a few years, I used, what is that called? Padlet. So I had a standing questions every week. We had a speaker come in that was from industry or, working on some sort of tech project. They would talk. And students were prompted to ask about capable practice. So these are the kind of how the questions you might expect about technical design and things like that. But then also responsible practice. And that was anchored around a list of values that come from the iSchool at UW. So they were just a list of human values. I think there's like 16 in that particular list. The students got familiar with, and they got practice, and they had to ask questions. Everybody had to ask questions. And over the course of the quarter, people really did get a lot better. I like having the framework of values, 16 different kinds of values, because different projects anchor to different values. So I think this is something I actually have gotten away from in my other classes, but I think now that I'm thinking about it, this is a pretty good idea. I'm going to bring this back. This is, I think that the students are really good. So what I've learned is that there is something about anchoring students to the ethical concerns that they have, but that's also limiting because they only have certain kinds of experience. So it's constraining in some ways as well. And what I know is that as we talked about, good science is the work of many hands, and good change is the work of many hands. So helping students to understand, again, within the technology that they're engaging with and the course content, what that means. So I teach an interaction design class. Everybody's favorite class is when we read about dark patterns and the bad things that people do, the things that we all hate. We have the gray area. We talk about, they have to decide. So I'm really big on having the students decide what's good and what's not, and from their perspective, and then discussing it together. So that's my big trick, because that's what we have to do in the real world. That's how policy works. That's how change happens in the real world. So more practice with that around our own technical competencies, I think, is great from the beginning. So, so they have to decide. They come up with a long list of things that they think are ethically over the line, based on a reading that has a lot of options. And then they have to map it. They have to map it against these set of stakeholders. They have to come up with solutions, and then they vote on the solutions. The fairy godmother is going to make one ethical intervention, and the class votes on it. So we talked about case studies yesterday. So this is from Computers and Society ethics class. It's the ethics class for UW-Bothell students in computer software engineering. It's an optional class. It's optional. So when I got this class, it was, so fun fact, I should record. I don't know if I should say this. So there was a high percentage of students, I figured out, like 2/3 of the way through this ethics class had pirated the textbook, and 1/3 didn't know that you could pirate textbooks. So it's like the things that happen with ethics and tech and the real world things that we sort of can anchor around. But with this, again, they got to pick the topics, but they had to come from Reuters. I only gave them 2 places to look, Reuters and one other source, I think, so that they had a filter for something that was global and related. So every week they read the textbook, but then they picked cases that were real world cases and topical, because they're coming through Reuters, which has a global reach. So we had always tech topics that they cared about, and then they'd had to build cases in class. And because they have less experience working on the social side, and some of the things I was introducing, like what's a socio-technical system and stakeholder analyses, were new to them. That scaffolding happened in the class. So they come in, they do the case studies and the course reading, but then all the class time, one class is prepping them to do the case study. And then the second is them discussing the case study and doing interactive exercises that they designed. So I put this framework into the shared folder. Of course, at the working, with people that are they're graduate students that are really highly capable, and the scientists, the project leads that they work with on those teams over the summer, the ethics is really, like I said yesterday, really integrated in. So, and we have more than one way that we anchor this, right? So this relationship around collaboration, and how collaboration is really vital to realizing any kind of good. And the more that I sort of think about it and experience it, from the 200 levels up to watching, teams of scientists go crazy, making good through science. I'm convinced that a lot of the sort of micro interactions that happen even in a classroom are real learning opportunities to build out the skills that we need to help people understand how to do change responsibly. And so I see less and less difference about, in that way. So there's things like the reflection questions and those kind of things that's what we need to do, like in the world too, right? It's like, do you have time when you're in the middle of a build? Can you stop and ask a question about like, wow, I don't know if we should be using this data, or, I know this would take more time, but maybe we should do this instead of that. Do you have the agency and the culture in your organization, and do you feel comfortable with that? I mean, I think that's really the secret sauce that we all have the opportunity to help people do whatever we're teaching in any kind of situation. But we do a lot of anchoring in this. So there's all the normal things: career exploration, project management support. Of course, they're getting a lot of practice with data science methods, like the ECM style methods that were shown yesterday that Rick showed us. Professional development, they're getting a lot of hands-on mentoring and coaching around those. And then there's the human-centered design element. And then we also have critical data studies. So it works like this is all, thought through from the beginning. But what I would say is most important, I think, that you can take away is that we start by telling them that good is contested, that we don't all have the same idea of good, and they will encounter ethical issues there is going to be an ethical component. It's going to happen. And otherwise, because I know from my own experience getting trained in engineering and now working in an interdisciplinary context, there's other people around your campus that they get a lot more preparation professionally to deal with the tricky issues of being a human being and dealing with other human beings. If we were in this, social workers, they have to think about power dynamics. They're trained in power dynamics, right? They have to. It's part of their job is to think about how to be responsible when there's an inequity around power and agency, right? And we just don't get that time in engineering. That's just not our wheelhouse as much. So when we're getting into something like we're trying to, touch on these issues, we come sometimes, well, is it okay for me to talk about this? Is this okay? A lot of it I think is just normalizing. Then yes, if you think this is swinging us towards good or swinging us away from good, if your gut's telling you this and you think it's worth bringing up, then we want to give people the agency and space to have those conversations. So that's like, it's as simple as that. I mean, I really think that my job, I thought my job might be trying to sell people on what good is or that, but what I've realized is that we all have that gut meter. Everybody comes with one, we're born with that. And we just need to create the container for people to figure out how to safely and comfortably bring up these issues that are tender, right, in the moment. So I'm going to skip the rest of that because you also have all these I put them in the shared drive. So this is I think again, so I think when we can, there's a lot of things that are process oriented in fields like the humanitarian sector. Again, a very process oriented sector, right? Because humanitarian work, at the end of the day, what good, responsible humanitarian practice is you are giving agency to a community. The community is deciding what the issues are. The community is deciding what the resources, how resources get leveraged, and you're there as an assist to get those resources used the way that they want to sort of amplify whatever the community agency is. And so it's very much nothing in their version of good happens until you really have buy-in from the community. You understand them, you understand the power dynamics, you know what they want, and then you're marshaling all the sponsors and all the other assets to come to aid. And so to do that, in those kind of sectors, they have tools like stakeholder analysis. They have lots of tools and practices and cultural orientations that are different than what we have in the engineering, math, science fields in a lot of cases. And this is stakeholder analysis is one of these that I find very portable. It's something that you can do you can do it in an hour, you can do it in 2 hours, you can spend a day doing it. And it helps people to understand who they're supporting. And for the first couple of years of DSSG, I felt like I had real imposter syndrome because I'm around all these people that are like, yeah, the machine learning, blah, 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 parallel processing, da, 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 you know, whatever. And I'm like, I'm just here to help people talk to other people, you know, and stuff like, how did I sneak in the door? But there'd be one moment in every DSSG where someone would be like, oh, so the people that we're making this for are not the people that we intend to benefit for. And I'd be like, I just earned my salary this summer, you know? And the good news is that happens less because we've all gotten wiser about data science and what it means in a social context and how challenging that can be. And so now students come in and they're terrified that they're going to do the wrong thing. The students that we have are much more in that space of, well, is there any possible way that we can, you know, in this messy social world and data science world that we can actually do some good that is, you know, how do you do that, right? Because it's very technically challenging in some ways to do something, like I said, the public administrative data, you know, you got all that data, how do you de-identify it? You can't, you know, there has to be trusted actors in there. There's always these trusted actors and these trusted relationships that have to go. It goes back, like you're looking at the biggest data in the world, you know, that you can possibly imagine. And it's all reliant on trusted relationships at the end of the day. Oh, and security, right? Cybersecurity, all these things, all of those things come into play. So, now my job is a lot of like, yeah, it's hard. Yeah. This is a lot of work. Yep, I feel you. You know, and that's really just affirming people's guts and affirming that it's technologically challenging, it's intellectually challenging, it's collaboratively challenging. And that's, you know, a lot of the space that I hold these days. But in terms of analytics, stakeholder power analysis is really good. And I'd be happy to share. Anissa Tanwir always does this workshop. But I'd be happy to share this with you, as well as the stakeholder engagement protocol that I have, which is dead simple because in an interdisciplinary context, I can't bring any of my own language into the space. So we started out that way. We started out with a lot of, you know, me coming in and using a lot of language used in industry about human-centered design, user-centered design, blah, 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 blah. And then quickly realized that one, that doesn't help if you're working collaborative. You need the plainest language possible in a space where people are already throwing 100,000 acronyms at each other. And then two, deeper, as I got more into the work, a lot of the things that are tailored for industry are actually not a fit for this space. And so that's more of the researchy stuff that I'm working on, you know, slow and steady. All right, I just did a lot of talking. Now I think it'd be fun to do this. I don't know if this is going to work with the Google Slides, but we thought it might be fun to try to map ourselves on here to the kinds of good that you're aiming to do to these categories. So what I envision is that we like make stars or something and people put them, and maybe we don't spend this much time on it. I don't know how useful it's going to be. It's kind of an experimentation. So maybe like, I'm going to say like, can we get in there and just say like, where are you thinking for the goods you're kind of trying to tackle? And if you want to try to do stars on there, you can, or mark it up somehow for yourself for where you're trying to take your work with your students. And if that doesn't work, then we'll just rely on the notes. But this is a transition into getting more nitty gritty about project stuff. So I don't want to spend too much time on this. Let's just try to have a little fun and throw some dots on or throw some, yeah. Would you want to do in it? Sorry, what's the modification? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I had. Yeah. Yeah. So if you want to just do it, yeah. So let's just say like what are the characteristics of what complexity? Because I just like, it's all complex. When we get to a certain point with data for social good, it's all complexity. So where are you trying to simplify? And where are you, what complexities are you trying to, move towards on these projects with your students? It's that simple, but let's give it like a shorter amount of time so we have time for project work. Yeah. Yes. Okay. That's the idea. Yeah. All right. So, yeah, I'm gonna 10 minutes for this. So just be a little bit, be a little deliberative and just a little bit of, yeah, whatever. So we can get into more of the pain points around projects and what people are doing solution wise. So notes are fine too, if you want to do notes. All right, we've got about a minute. Who has the microphone? Who has the mic? Okay. Okay. So, all right. Actually, you know what? We should probably do a roving mic this time. So, the kinds of good. So, kinds of good. So we have a whole range of people here that are looking for some low stakes impact kind of projects. And then there's some folks that are really looking for some high potential impact. So let's hear from somebody that's in the low stakes camp. What are you looking to accomplish with low stakes projects? Why go in that direction? Who's got the mic? Yeah. Okay. Anybody want to fess up to being wanting to do a low stakes project and why? Yeah.
I'm a community college instructor, and so
Yeah.
a lot of times I'll get students from low socioeconomic backgrounds and maybe are not either mathematically interested or don't have a strong math background, and so it's a safe place to get them started and show them the relevance of mathematics and statistics.
Okay, so keeping it feeling low stakes for the students is really important in terms of that we're not ratcheting on the pressure that they have to deliver, some great analytics to speak at a conference or something. Yeah. Okay. So that makes sense. That we're giving that low stakes feeling to students when appropriate. Who is on the other side of the spectrum? Who is looking for high degree, high impact projects? Who's working on that side of the spectrum? Yeah. You want to say anything about that? Give an example.
A lot of my projects revolve around pharmaceutical development. So as far as my students and I are concerned, there isn't much of a greater good that can be done than trying to save human lives.
All right, that's fair. So which is probably what drives a lot of people into health, right? I would assume that that's a big driver. I think, my experience trying to do good by trying to understand like how people use social media in crises and things like that is more fraught. So it gives me a different perspective on it. In the humanitarian space, you can't really just assume that you're doing good because we don't have that as a fallback. Okay. Novelty. So we have a whole spread here. We have a lot, we have some folks that are looking for a sweet spot, a Goldilocks spot in terms of novelty. So who's in the Goldilocks camp of like a little bit of novelty, but not too much? Who's in that camp? It looks like there's a couple of people.
Okay, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think a question that's coming up, and that came up a little bit at our table, but I'm thinking about like, how are we defining novelty? So like novelty within the problem space or the domain space of data science or machine learning or computer science might look different than how we need to define novelty in community engaged learning, or how we need to define novelty in interdisciplinary learning spaces. So I think like, how do we maybe come up with frameworks for novelty that are not just technical novelty or research novelty within a particular domain space, but interdisciplinary community engaged solutions is a novel thing. So I think even just like, how are we coming up with a framework for novelty, and that engages maybe larger institutional field and funding structures? Because like, if novelty has to be the brand new thing that nobody's ever done, but what's actually needed is students do need to learn the foundational thing, or the community needs the foundational thing, how can that be novel too? If others.
I love that. Thank you. That's awesome. That's a great clarity there. Yeah.
This is an easy point too, but it's just struck me too as when I answered this, I kind of like answered it in my own research. And then as soon as Laura told, and it was like, okay, but what am I trying to get my students to do too? And they're, sometimes they're orthogonal, but sometimes they're completely overlap. So I just, point that out as an interesting question too.
So I'll further add, right? Like I put the dot near the low end from the perspective of, in a research question, the novelty to me is way less important at a teaching school. But who is the novelty to, right? The novelty to students is very different, right? Like a novelty to students might be very high for something that is totally not novel. An example, last semester, my students did their capstone project. They were learning Microsoft Power Apps to build an electronic employee evaluation form. That is not a novel research question. No one cares about that from a research question perspective. But my students had never seen Microsoft Power Apps. They spent the semester learning a totally new thing, right? And so there was a high degree of novelty to the student learners that was really valuable. But in terms of a research question, it was super low in terms of the novelty. It was nothing that many other companies haven't already done somewhere else. And so I think remembering that there's a giant difference there. And we also talked a little bit about the idea of novelty, at least in research intervention spaces, from different learning levels, right? That at the undergraduate level, you might not really ever be hitting novel research questions, maybe in capstones or senior honors courses or things like that. But maybe as you get to higher degree levels, you start to see a little bit more novelty inside of the good that you're doing, such that you can see more novel research interventions and things like that. And that maybe we need to recognize that we're okay with that. And as a kind of a side on that, remember that this is something to be pushing our community engagement, a broader community, like when we talk computer science and statistics and math and journals and things like that, that there needs to be a valuing on novelty in the right spaces.
So soundness and reproducibility. Okay, this is good. This is fun to see. I like this. Just a little bit of data gets us all excited, right? I love the Pac-Man too. It's fun. So wickedness and complexity, it looks like we're veering away from high complexity. And anybody want to, let's hear from someone that hasn't spoken of where you landed with this, with the wickedness complexity. What's the rationale? Where did you put yourself, and what was your rationale?
That's okay. You can talk about why you're on the low. Oh, well, she called for them. There is no one on the high. There's no one on the high for complexity.
Yeah, we've got no one high.
So
That's interesting. And that makes sense, right? Because we're educators, and then maybe that, so got a hand up.
So at least in my experience, the more complexity that you have in a problem, the less not open, but like if I'm thinking about, for instance, in a project-based learning, whether it's a hackathon or a full class or whatever, like the less complex it is, the more interdisciplinary our teams can be, right? The more people from all sorts of different backgrounds can come together and work on that problem. When I start to deal with really high complexity data, so if we're talking about health data, for instance, or genomics data, like that is very highly complex data. And now it's a lot harder to get a lot more folks involved, and you've got to put in a lot more, a lot more guardrails and a lot more workshops around just understanding the data and getting more folks up to speed. So like the amount of effort to try to continue to get that diverse participation is a lot harder. Not impossible, but it's just really hard to have a diverse group of folks on something when you've got really technically complex things.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I think it gets back to, if we can't work these out on these little projects, how do we have transparency and accountability around any of the tech that we do or the data science that we do? So yeah.
It's also to me,
yeah.
it's the lift, right? When we start talking about, if you're not just talking about the data, but when you start now to talk about the other kind of complexities that you introduced the other day, Dharma, like the
organizational, social,
the fact that it requires many stakeholders or whatever else, then it becomes a much bigger lift as a faculty member.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it does, right? If you're doing it on your own, you don't have a partner that's that's in love with the problem, right? Partners that are in love with the problem, in love with the community, in love with the organizational and social dynamics. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyone else want to, that was a fun little mapping exercise. I feel like we learned something from that. Okay. So we're winding down on the amount of time for this workshop, but then you get a break. Yay. So you've earned it. You're almost there. So I wanted to talk about project pain points a little bit. And I hoped that we'd have more time than we did, but the discussion's been great so far. So I'm really happy. So I hope you are as well. But one thing that came out last night for sure when we were talking about projects was that something that stood out, kind of the identification and development of quality projects is definitely a pain point. We talked about it a lot, and people have really good ideas. There's a lot of different strategies that people are working. So for developing projects, there was like in-house development. So I don't remember your name from St. Louis, but I remember where you're from. So what's your name? Katie was talking about developing in-house projects around data that schools have and working more in development with the data that's there and developing a roster of internal stakeholders that and we discovered, I learned a lot. Like, for example, wow, you have people on campus that probably are trained in project management and agile project management or handling tech and things like that, that maybe they could actually be one of these people that you're bringing in to help with projects and give some input and feedback on student projects and things like that. And so, there's all kinds of innovative things that people are doing, developing data sets that are capstone data sets, right? So having projects that happen year after year around capstone and they develop, the data iterates and is updated. So lots and lots of cool ideas. So since we know it's a pain point, why don't we spend, I'm going to give you a choose your own adventure. I'm going to suggest that the question is not what the pain point is. The question is what's working for you or could work for you in terms of identifying and developing quality data for good projects. And we can use the rest of the time that we have for that. But I also, if you really will have a bee in your bonnet and you need to get out some pain points, there's also a slide for that, right? And it's just a little bit organized so you can put where your pain point is or just stick it there. And I don't know if we'll have time to unpack that, but we have another workshop happening. So, and we've got break is very important as well. So, let's do, I'm going to say let's do 10 minutes of, hey, what's working for you? Let's get some ideas. What works for you already in terms of identifying and developing quality data for good projects? Okay, so I think it's important. I think that the most important part of a workshop is the time in between the workshop. And so when we're hanging out, having coffee, and you're getting to chat with the person that you want to chat with. So I'm going to wrap this up. I'm trying to wrap this up on time. So we might short circuit this discussion a little bit, which is okay. I think that's fine. So what's working for you in terms of identifying projects? Anybody want to, any table want to share out? What's working in terms of identifying projects?
I reflected on, we talked a lot at the capstone table the other day about lots of places to source original projects from, but I was thinking back to when I was successful at Valpo for having regularly occurring projects for a client consulting place. And what was honestly better for me long-term was I ended up through networks and connections and sort of going to places and talking to people, getting one or two trusted contacts at organizations that would regularly be producing projects. And so the two examples that I had was I ended up having a contact at the US Geological Survey Station in the Dune stations. And so she was able to, because I had a good relationship with her and ran a project or two with her, I could go to her and be like, hey, talk to all the people at the Dune station, find out who's willing to work with a project this year with my students. And so I wasn't forced to do all the legwork to recruit individual collaborators. I had a contact that was essentially the go-between for me and the organization that then she could help facilitate. She did a little bit of the legwork in between, right? And then, but also we had that trusted relationship that could continue to produce projects. And I think one of the things that was important about that contact was she was at an organization that generated many potential project opportunities. And so could then source projects that were appropriate at the time.
Okay, so I heard two things. I heard a couple of things. Regular, repeated clients, relationship with somebody that can help you recruit the right projects. And so you're not having to do the recruiting. And we talked about that yesterday too, that there's offices of, we have the Office of Connected Learning at UW-Bothell, although it doesn't work as well for some projects as it seems to work for other departments. But we talked, other folks said that there's ways that you can tap in, or, you know, an agency, nonprofit consortium organizations. There's different, can you tap into somebody that can field a lot of projects for you and be targeting really not just one project, but somebody that can help you consistently get projects. Sounds like a very smart way to go. Other ideas that came up for identifying and developing good projects?
I'll throw it out as an alternative for like the USGS. Almost all of you have city organization people, and there's someone probably in your, especially if you're in a bigger city, that deals with the data sources in your city. And if you can get a good contact, it might take some time to find the right person, but you find the right person in that organization, they'll be able to do the same kind of thing that like my USGS contacted. They'll source the projects inside the city data to say, oh yeah, these people have some time this semester to work on a project with you. Here's a project that's useful if you can find the right person in your city org of data.
Awesome. And I think Katie mentioned yesterday, name checking Katie twice, epicn.org, which is about this kind of relationship development with cities and using cities as clients to do student work. So those are good ideas. And there's many more good ideas that folks had that we will now have to talk about during coffee break or what's coming next. It's 11:15. So what's happening now?
So what is happening now is we've got about 10 to 15 minutes for people to grab coffee, use the restroom, get your water, whatever you want, and then collect, talk, reset your brain a little bit, get that chance to clear out your RAM and your memory. And then we'll come back for Richard's plenary before lunch. So
thank you, everybody. Thanks for working hard at this workshop.
yeah, thanks for the hard work.